I'm Bob Windover. We've all been in a meeting where the energy shifts when the boss shows up, right? Perhaps the subject changes suddenly. People get quiet. The person running the meeting begins a new agenda item. And if the boss says, "Hey, how's everybody doing?" everybody says, "Fine." This is not unlike the response parents get when asking a teenager how school was that day. Even if the boss says, "Oh, don't pay any attention to me," everybody does anyway. The same thing is true in other settings. When I worked in the restaurant business, we all knew where the owner was at all times. Now he knew this tracking was going on, of course, so sometimes he'd lie. He'd say something like, "Well, I'm going to the Trenton store," when in reality he was really headed to the Langhorne store. Of course, this fostered mistrust and not a little paranoia. This is also the reason I've sometimes asked an organization's leader to refrain from attending a session where I am working with the managers. When the leader's in the room, all the energy seems to be directed toward them. Of course, this is not a healthy way for the organization to function, of course. So what can you do as a leader to mitigate this effect? Well, here's what I've observed effective leaders do, and see if these match your practices. The first strategy is not to attend the meeting, of course, or gathering. Now, that may seem obvious, but it's also counterproductive. Sometimes it's important that you just be there. Is there an alternative? Actually, a couple. One leader I observed drills down on his role in the meeting before agreeing to attend. Now he asks questions like, "Well, why do I really need to be there?" Or, "What specifically do you need in my presence of being there?" Now, specifically is the key word. Then he makes a decision based on the response. If the asker responds with a definitive purpose, he's more likely to say yes. But he's especially cautious when the person inviting him says something like, "Oh, well, we'd just like to hear what you think about the issue." And too many times he said, that's just been another way of saying, "Well, we want you to tell us what to do." Now, an alternative to all of this is to say, "Well, I tell you what, shoot me an email with the decision to be made and the context involved. Then let's plan for me to attend maybe the end after you've hashed out all the details and can present me with your recommendations. And if there's more than one viable option, we can discuss those when I arrive." Another leader told me that in addition to being careful about the meetings that she attends, she politely refuses to provide input before the others in the room. If people shy away from offering opinions and ideas, she said, "I've gone so far as to excuse myself so that they can talk candidly." And once I've done that a couple of times, they realize that I really truly am interested in what they have to say, and they begin to open up. Of course, a lot of this has to do with the level of trust within the decision culture. When candid input and feedback have been embraced in the past, those in the meeting will be more likely to speak their minds and offer suggestions. But saying things like, "Well, I'm really interested in what you think," is meaningless if that's not been demonstrated over time. As the old saying goes, actions speak louder than words. Still, a third leader told me that he will ask people directly what they think, but only if he's the one running the meeting. Over time, he said, people have come to recognize that if they don't participate, I will ask them anyway. Now, admittedly, this approach can take a certain style of leadership. But that's a topic for another post. Bottom line, be careful not to let yourself be drawn into meetings and conversations and decisions where your very presence might very well skew the outcome. How do you deal with this challenge? Let me know in the comments. I'm Bob Windover.